Welcome to Psychosynthesis Conversations, your channel for psychospiritual reflections and experiences. And now, to introduce you to our topic for today, here is your host, Kenneth Sorensen.
Welcome to Psychosynthesis Conversation. Today I had the great joy of speaking to Niklas Trane. Niklas Trane is the founder of Copenhagen School of Healing Arts, which offers advanced training for psychotherapists, psychologists, and body therapists in trauma therapy. The school focuses on training therapists to facilitate trauma therapy for clients who seek help with the consequences of sexual abuse, violence, neglect, loss, emotional neglect, attachment trauma, bullying, birth trauma, chronic illnesses, pain, and more. In addition to practicing as a psychotherapist based on his integrative foundation training for more than 24 years, Niklas has taught psychotherapists full-time for 13 years and has led numerous workshops both in Denmark and internationally. Niklas' overall professional understanding of human development is grounded in integrative neuroaffective theory and practice. He is an accredited consultant in EMDR, trained to level 3 in IFS, internal family systems, and certified in brain spotting. Furthermore, he is well-versed in Jungian analytical therapy and naturally incorporates drawings, dreams, and bodily processes into his therapy. For a decade, Niklas has also trained with Bert Hellinger, an internationally recognized pioneer in healing transgenerational traumas. In addition to his specialized training in trauma therapy, Niklas has practiced meditation for over 24 years and engaged in body-oriented and relational self-development and consciousness practices. Privately, Niklas is the father of an adult daughter, an adult son, and 2 stepdaughters, and he is married to Amalie Trane, a psychotherapist, visual artist, and spiritual guide. The couple lives in Copenhagen. Now, without further ado, I present to you Niklas Trane. Hey there, Kenneth here from Psychosynthesis Self-Mastery. Today I have the great joy of inviting Niklas Trane to this conversation about trauma. And Niklas is a very good colleague from Denmark, which I followed him for a couple of years. And I'm very excited to have him on this podcast right now because he's just out with a book. Of course, the book is in the Danish language, but I know there will be a lot of visitors here also from Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, and they will be able to read the book. So perhaps that would be interesting. But now to you, Niklas. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you and share some of your insight on trauma. But before we go to the topic, could you tell us a bit about who are you and how did you come into this type of work?
Yes, I will come to that. First of all, thank you for inviting me and having me here. It's a pleasure to be able to fold out this subject together with you, because it's also like, I think it's sometimes like being a musician when you're living from your hobby. This work within this psyche, a realm of the soul and spirit is a big interest of mine and also a hobby. And I know that you have been diving into many detailed aspects of this work for years and years. So I'm also looking forward to this conversation.
And how did it all start, Niklas? I know you have been into this for many years, so perhaps you could share a bit about how did you end up in this career?
Yeah, sometimes we understand stuff like this in retrospect.
Exactly.
And I'm starting to see how it all came, that I suddenly found myself in this field of work and interest. I think my mother was really traumatized herself. And I think that she, due to her suffering, closed her heart really,
Mm.
and I grew up so with a mother without being able to resonate with love. I think she just walled off her heart,
Mm.
and my dad was very much engaged in the material world, making a career, and was I was not able to connect with him.
Mm.
So for some reason, I found myself being unable to reach either my mother or my father.
Mm.
So when I came to understand myself now as a grown-up man, I have a big feeling inside me of being an orphan, really.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think that I could identify as a wounded healer.
Mm.
That is the inspiration for my seeking is my own pain and my own, also a curiosity that I woke, I think, even as a child, when I found myself like stuck in a situation or in muddy waters and unable to orient myself. Sometimes I was able to draw in some clarity and get a sense of there are different layers of consciousness. And I think I got these windows opened very early in my life, and,
Mm.
and it sparked something, an interest in me, like, okay, we can be stuck in a way in an impossible situation with suffering, and sometimes there are a different shift of consciousness that suddenly creates an ability to navigate again and to have clarity.
Mm. Was there any particular time where you had some kind of a transition or where you woke up to your own misery?
Yeah,
I can really relate to what you're speaking about. It almost sounds like my story.
yeah,
And so, to really understand it, it was pain itself, it was life itself, and it can sometimes be very brutal. So, would you characterize it as that the pattern you came from was some kind of a isolation, abandonment, and experience like that?
yes.
Yeah,
Deep loneliness, isolation, abandonment, being on my own, really, and
yeah.
trying to succeed in this, and maybe trying to meet expectations. I studied economy and finance in the Copenhagen Business School, and
Mm.
suddenly, in my 20s, I found myself in a corporate job, a really high pressure job, and sitting there one day, I was making conferences about leadership, and I was calling all these managers and directors and trying to hire them as speakers. And it was high pressure job. And suddenly I looked into the screen of my computer, and the question emerged: Why am I doing this? And that question ravaged all every trying to hold on to a meaning or purpose inside me, and just created a void
Mm.
that opened inside. And I looked into my screen, I think for 10 minutes or something.
Mm.
And then I went to my boss's office and said, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong place. And he was actually quite a cool guy, and he looked back at me and said, okay, I can see that you're free to go. And
Mm.
10 minutes after, I drove home, and I knew that my corporate career was over.
Wow.
Yeah,
Was really a turning point.
yeah, it was.
Wow. So, was there anything? What was it? Just like some kind of a wall that you hit, and there was just no way through it, and or whether also something other, an intuitive voice that said that there was something other, but or was it just this? No, I cannot go further.
At that point, it was really misery. I think there was an intuition behind
Yeah,
many layers of foggy darkness. But at that point, it was just pure misery. I was displaced. It was not
yeah,
my. I was swimming in the wrong waters,
yeah.
and it took me a year of trying to renegotiate who I was, and tearing down the structures I have been building up.
Mm,
And at one point, I was sitting. I went to my first session with a famous Danish psychologist, an old guy, and he taught me some self hypnosis. And there was this guiding where I was filling up my body with light. And I was
mm,
sitting with this, it was an old tape recorder, listening to the guiding. And I filled myself up with light. And when I came to the top of my head, I was sending up kind of a question: Is there anything out there? That wasn't on the recording, but
uh,
I just got the idea of sending up the question from the top of my head, and I had a feeling of light coming down as an answer, and it
mm,
also had a resonating sound in it, and that was the inspiration that was a calling for me to work with suffering, consciousness, light,
mm,
love, understanding what it means to be a human being. That started in that, and it took me a week to tell my wife about it back then, because when I was a kid, we were joking. When a person was religious, you would said
mm.
he had seen the light, and you was like, ha ha ha.
Yeah, and now you are in that very
Exactly.
position. Oh no.
I looked myself in the mirror, and I whispered to myself, "You have seen the light." It was like ridiculous, and I couldn't tell anybody because there was a spiritual shame, I think. Uh,
Yeah.
uh, and but that was what I did. I saw the light.
Oh, very good. Well, if I should reflect a bit about your story here to this point, it sounds like we have a concept in psychosynthesis, and that's a concept about the survival personality. And the survival personality is a behavior pattern that we develop due to trauma and not being seen as an authentic human being. It is our adaptation to an unempathetic environment. So we start believing that we have to be like our parents or any other role models out there, and we try to make it going for a while, but at some time, some of us, some stay in that survival pattern the whole life, but some of us is so fortunate to experience a lot of pain, and then a crack in the in the self image, and you experience, I cannot go further with this type of job. So it's in some way it's a fracture of an old identity, and you have to reinvent yourself anew. So this is what you were actually doing here. You came from this,
Mm.
old image of you have to be successful in the corporate world, and now you're sitting here doing this exercise and seeing the light. So it's quite a span, it's quite a transition and transformation from the old self and now to a beginning new understanding of, yeah, who you are in a much broader context. Does this does this narrative or this way of expressing your breakdown or breakthrough
Yeah.
uh, make sense?
Yes, it does, and it was a
Mm,
breakdown and a breakthrough all at once,
mm,
and many times I've been thankful for having my midlife crisis in my late 20s. I thought,
mm,
okay, now I have in a young age, I now have the beginning of something else, of
mm.
trying to connect to who I really am, and
Yeah.
I'm
How
grateful.
old were you approximately when you had
20,
this?
and I was 27.
Okay, 27, yes.
Yeah.
And what happened then? You
After a year or something, and many coincidences awake me to studying transpersonal psychology, or I trained to be a psychotherapist,
yes.
and for some years trying to make a living from this. Also doing a lot of teaching in transpersonal psychotherapy for
Mm.
13 years actually.
Yeah, it
And
was in Denmark.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I was working with this self-development field, together with a lot of seekers, and also seeking for clarity or love or different dimensions of being, trying to connect with the soul. And I did a lot of different therapeutic modalities, and I read hundreds of books, like you probably also did.
Yes.
I was really a seeker for many years.
Mm.
And then after 20 years or 18 years or something like that, I came to a dead end again. It was like sometimes you meet people, even yourself, after many years of seeking, and people ask themselves, do I feel better now? And
Mm.
and sometimes
I recognize that. Do I feel better?
I don't know. I'm confused in a higher level. I saw
Yeah.
my shadow, but do I feel better? I don't know. And 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 I was looking for inspirations in books, and it was like a desert walk. There were further and further distance between inspirational quotes and feeling of hitting something of value.
Mm.
And that was at the same time where I had a conflict with the guy I was working for,
Mm.
and then it came to a dead end where I stopped that career and quit my job again.
Yeah.
Well, this one I had for many years,
Yes.
but now I was going to redefine and what I was doing, and try to find a new inspiration, a new.
How many years are we back now?
Yeah, we are
Mm.
8 years back,
Yes.
and in that time, suddenly I read the book "The Body Keeps the Score" by Bessel van der Kolk, and I
Mm.
know this book has inspired many people. It's also one of the sources that inspire the whole wave of interest in the trauma work.
Mm.
And for me, suddenly this book was like, okay, there was a lot of precise insights there, and it
Mm.
engaged my system. I found like a new vitality in my work, and I wanted to really deal with this work with suffering, addressing suffering more directly than before.
Mm.
So from seeking spirit, soul, clarity, love, expansion of consciousness,
Yes.
I turned my interest to how to engage with suffering.
Mm.
And that was like a vitamin or vitality in the work I was doing.
Mm.
And I started doing a lot of trauma therapy trainings, specializing in different modalities of trauma therapy.
Mm.
And I wrote on my door and on my website, working with traumas. And then suddenly clients came, also people who had been working and being in therapy for decades.
Mm.
And many people came and said, well, I have this trauma from childhood or from my teenage year, and I never approached it.
Mm.
And now it's the time.
Mm.
And suddenly there was a new juiciness and passion in the work,
Mm.
because this was really, for me, it's like contractions of darkness and suffering that is in the core of trauma. And
Mm,
at the same time, it seems to be condensed light of some kind
mm,
when people are suddenly again able to relate to what was encapsulated, or
yeah.
then suddenly it opens as consciousness or light, or and in that way it's really the most rewarding work.
Mm.
Yeah,
I,
that's
I I'm a bit before we go into detailed conversation about trauma. I'm a bit intrigued by this experience you had, where you, yeah, in a psychosynthesis context, we would say that you had an approach where you really had a longing for the superconscious and trying to reach the superconscious and opening up to spiritual dimension, expanding your consciousness. And for some reason, uh, that was not enough. No, there was some kind of yeah, you said there was a lack of vitality, and in some way I had the same experience. A big turnaround. I think also it was 15 years ago, or perhaps only 10 years ago, where I had had a lot of trans transpersonal experience and also transcending experiences
mm,
where I truly experienced myself as pure light and pure love, and it was just extremely, ecstatic and also liberating. But I always came to the conclusion that I was not able to embody it. I
mm,
was not able to really live that energy. There was such a gap, or you could call it a distance between these height experiences and my ability to express it in my daily life. So I realized that I actually had to, in some way, return to the contractions within my subconscious,
right,
because it was almost like there was some kind of I was stuck in the lower levels. I was There was something the light could not penetrate. After I had an experience of being pure love, the opposite came up, hate or aggression, or because the subconscious level have so many hidden unconscious layers that has not been purified.
yes,
So I would say that most of my work today is also addressing shadows, going into shadow, working with these limitations in my, yeah, both in my body and my in psychosensory we would call it in the lower unconscious. But of course, I still have a meditation practice and seeking to clear the channel and have an open. But it's all about being able to bring it through, and this is where the trauma work becomes such an important aspect of the spiritual work, because there's still a spiritual perspective and also yeah, a meditative work, but it's all about bringing the light and the love and the power into these inhibitions. Is that also how you experience where you are today?
yes, it is. And I could say my old teacher and also boss, and the old way of work, where on the institution where I was teaching, has this very beautiful, also a true way of working. In Roberto Assagioli's words, he would be, or we would be working with sub personalities,
Exactly.
and we would embody a sub personality and feel it from the inside and try to look from the eyes of this sub personality, and then we would step back from it and witness how it was.
Yes.
And the whole idea of that work I was doing for so many years was,
Yes.
was like a meditation, trying to realize that I was not the different parts of the
Mm,
personality, but that I was as a subject, like pure consciousness or
mm,
formless awareness, and realize this. You are not either this or that, but
Mm.
you are the one who was able to witness it all, and in that sense, formless or shapeless, clear being or
Mm.
consciousness. Something like that.
Exactly.
That
Yes.
was the praxis, and I was engaging in this praxis for years and years and years. And the idea was to realize I am the witness, I am the one that is in which all of these different
Mm.
aspects is arising.
Mm.
And but
Yes. Now the buts.
yes, the new way or the other way of looking to the subpersonalities is a more healing oriented approach,
Mm.
where we see, okay, they are actually having functions, and
Yes.
some subpersonalities are like exiled by
Yes.
other personalities. They are actually working around in small clusters,
Exactly.
and they are trying to exile other sub personalities,
Yes.
and especially the ones who is carrying the most suffering, who's
Mm.
most in distress. Numerous other sub-personalities are working together in blocking off, blurring, distancing, dissociating, comforting, doing a lot of different functions, trying to wall off or exile these fragments of personalities
Yeah.
carrying the distress and the trauma.
Yeah.
So this is a different. Engages the subject in a different way, because then looking into myself or guiding a client to look into him or herself is about trying to see what appears, and in a way negotiating with the self-protective sub-personalities for trust,
Yes.
to 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 see how can I be trustworthy enough
Mm.
to again being able to relate to the distressed parts of the personality. How can I get the trust of the self-protective system to
Mm.
be able to bring connection, love, clarity, and awareness to the parts that are being exiled.
Yeah.
And
But was the old approach to subpersonality work, was that not engaging these exiles? Or what is the new
it lacked
understand?
it lacked the understanding of how the personality was working.
Ah,
It
okay.
it it didn't care if it was an adapted child or an inner critic or a judge or a traumatized part of the personality. The
Mm.
only interest was to associate and dissociate, and to go in and out, and then
Yes,
realize that you were the witness. It it
yes.
it was it's like when you're meditating, and the suffering is presenting itself in your span of awareness or field of awareness, and you notice the suffering and look at it and say, okay,
Mm.
and return to your breathing.
Mm.
If you were parenting your children the same way, th- they would make a lot of trouble. I've tried to do this with the hangover, and
This
it
is
didn't
a very good point.
it didn't work. They were all around the house.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So
Exactly.
they need your attention. They
Yes,
need to be engaged. They need
yes.
to feel that you're actually interested in what they are bringing to you. They
Yeah,
want to feel that you want to do something with them. and
yeah.
and, and the sub personalities are reacting the same way. It's not enough for them just to be okay. they,
No.
they actually want to your relational ping pong. They want to tell a story. They want to be gotten. They want to be felt. They want to be like embraced
Yeah.
and understood and related to, and it's not enough just to be a witness with them.
No, no, I totally agree, and this is also my experience of this type of work. That and I would also say that I find it very difficult to work with these types of deeper traumatic layers alone. Sitting on my couch and just witnessing and going in. There's simply not enough energies, and I cannot see my own blinders. I cannot see my own repressions. So to have an experienced guide or an experienced person to sit and hold the space and also um, be loyal to the small voices, because the exiles is very subtle. They very often they don't make a big fuss because they're so used to be repressed and ignored. And if you really have someone to hold in the space and helping um, gently and empathically make room for the repressed part. I think this is so important. I think we have to be two at least
Mm.
to work with these type of repressed parts.
Yes, it needs someone there to be authentic, and
Yeah.
that is also the challenge. Who is the subject? From what standpoint is a person able to relate to something that used to be overwhelming, unbearable,
Mm,
and and also in relation, uh, to what degree are we able to be deeply authentic, and maybe a protective part or a part of the personality with a that has a project of sometimes, or the will is blending in the relation. So this is the really big question in all healing work.
mm,
Who is able to do the healing?
mm,
And in my experience, in some words you could call it the self, or
mm,
the true subject,
mm.
the one inside of the of us who's able to relate.
Exactly.
And so it needs a high degree of clarity.
Mm.
And if it is there in a relationship, it's a beautiful container for healing, and healing will find a way through that connection for sure. And
Yeah.
yeah.
So, if we should help the viewers get a grasp of what trauma is, uh, how would because there are many conceptions of trauma, but if you should give some kind of an overview of
Mm.
how to understand what trauma is, how would you put it?
There are many ways, but one way I like thinking about it for the time being is, if you have a subjective experience, then you kind of own the experience because you were there to have the experience. You felt the feelings, you stood in it, and you were relating to what was going on.
Mm,
When a traumatizing situation is going on, the subject is overruled, and you
mm,
are not having the experience, but the experience is having you.
mm,
So it never becomes a subjective experience. It does
mm,
not become something that you can relate to. It is not a part of your narrative. It's not even a part of your the the explicit memory where you can think back and reflect upon it, and work with language, understanding what went on, because you were not even able to be there to feel what was going on.
mm,
So when the subject is put out of play, and you're object in the experience, you're kind of um, helpless in what is going on,
mm,
either because it's too overwhelming, too unbearable, or you're really not able to understand anything of what you are in.
mm. Could you give
Then
an example, a
yeah,
concrete example of?
yes, if you are if you are 5 years old and you wake up at night and you're calling for mom and dad and nobody is coming, and you try to walk around in the house and find mom and dad and they are not there, and
Mm,
suddenly you're just with terror finding out you're alone in the house, and the terror becomes so overwhelming that you're just in shock, stiffening in your bed and lying there for who knows how long.
mm,
You're not able to, there's no explanation. As a 5-year old, you are not able to hear the music
mm,
and realize that the neighbors are having a party and they probably are in there. You're just like overwhelmed with fear.
mm,
If you had the same experience as a 13-year-old or 12-year-old, you could figure out, and you could run in your night clothes and say, "Hey, mom, dad, where are you?"
mm,
But when you're not able to do anything other than being overwhelmed, that's
mm.
something.
Yeah.
That's an example for me and for many other children in the 70s and the 60s. Uh, People and parents thought that the hospitals, and because of the authority of the doctors, they were taking care of the children. So many kids were going through operational procedures alone,
Mm,
and they stayed at the hospital at night.
mm.
Even I did that as a 3-year-old. I went through surgery, and it was just thought that you could send the parents home.
Yeah.
And people were telling the story, haha, it was so funny. I was walking alone in the hospital and looking for my brother, and looking in all the beds in there. But when I think it back on it, I was scared,
Mm,
frightened.
mm.
And today you wouldn't put a child through that, because
No,
now we know. But back then they didn't know.
no.
We thought, okay, the child is in the hospital. That's the biggest authority. It's being taken care of. But as a child being alone in a hospital bed at night when they
Mm,
sh- shut off the lights, that's really
mm.
terrifying.
Yeah.
So
So
that's
so to go back to the definition you gave that when there's no subject to have
mm,
the experience, then trauma can occur.
yes,
Um, but how about an infant who hasn't even developed a language yet, and where there is very little subject because the infant is so identified with its biological processes and its
yes,
sensations, and we know there is something called a birth trauma.
yeah.
Um, how do you, what is the understanding of trauma there?
Mm. That's a really wonderful question, and that opens up the complexity of this, because when awareness is getting closer and closer and closer to the exiled parts carrying the trauma, the self-protective systems becomes very alerted, because once it had the experience that the self was annihilated by the overwhelm of the trauma.
Mm,
So the protective systems is very hesitant, allowing awareness to come near to the part that is carrying the trauma,
mm,
because it annihilates the subject,
mm,
and then you are just thrown back in the experience and re-experiencing, being unable to relate to anything, and so actually the self is is um, is being destroyed by the trauma. That
mm,
was back then. So that is going on when there was a self. That when if you were more than 3 years old or 5 or 7, then then you had a feeling of me.
Yes.
So the personality had a center.
Mm.
But momentarily, while the trauma was going on, this center were being like overwhelmed.
Mm.
And then maybe I'm able to as me relate to the part that was fragmented out carrying the trauma. But what if the trauma went on before I had a sense of me? Then
Yes.
it's even more ownerless. That there's
Mm.
nobody there. That's not a me to
Mm.
relate to what went on. So there's an ownerless experience.
Mm.
And this is what many of us are carrying around.
Mm.
Um, and when an experience is ownerless, it is not non-dual, it's a-dual. There's
Yes.
no duality. So that means it becomes global.
Mm.
And so it fills up your entire span of awareness, and it is under the skin like a background music
Mm.
that you don't understand is coming from an experience.
Mm.
And many people are walking around in some of these experiences, and you're never able to see from where this background feeling is coming, but
Mm.
there's subtle feeling of being anxious, or there's a sudden subtle loneliness or yearning or suffering behind everything. There's a distant background music, and you're not able to locate it.
No, because it's not directed to any memory as
So,
such. There's no subject that had the memory of what occurred. So let's try to dig a bit into this birth trauma.
mhm,
It was in the old days, when I was born, it was also a regular practice whenever the child was born, then to remove him from the mother and place him in some kind of a box. Um, so, uh, as I understand it, the mother or the parent or the nurturer should in some way behave like the subject of the infant, because they should provide the nurture, the warmth, the love, the compassion, and make it a safe and good as possible experience to come to this world.
yeah,
But if there's not this connection with the mother, and I think the mother must be the most important person, because you have been carried around in the womb for 9 months. Um, so then there there is some kind of experience of abandonment uh, in the very moment that you arrive to the world.
mm,
And this could also happen if the mother don't have the capacity to be present. Perhaps she's overwhelmed by the birth experience. That could be many, many. Some is medicated, so they cannot be present. But it has an impact on the child's inner inner world, and in order to heal that, we could call it abandonment complex or abandonment experience. We have to have the subject going back and re-owning
mm,
that experience. Is that a correct understanding of
mhm.
how you see this?
Yes, and it is, and then there is a challenge, uh, how to make this time journey.
Yes.
And the neuroaffective theory it tells us that when your prefrontal cortex is online and being able to relate to the suffering, to the feelings, or to the pain, then you're able to make time journeys, time traveling inside your mind,
Mm.
because there's someone there who can lean back in time and visit the inner child who was there back and then, and
Exactly.
and build a relationship with this inner child.
Mm,
If you're overwhelmed and your prefrontal cortex is offline, you're unable to do this.
mm,
But when you go back in time, you come to a point where there was no me before you had a self,
yes.
and then it becomes blurry because
Mm,
there is no archives of memories. There's no images, there are no recordings of what happened, only
mm,
maybe stories and distant sensations.
mm,
But the funny thing is that when people realize this, sometimes a person will come into therapy, and we will start to explore some recent events and the emotional impacts they are having, and then I would guide the person to feel how it sits in the body and in the emotions, and guide the person to lean back in time and do a time journey with this feeling, and they would come out and say, it was always like this.
mm,
I don't have a memory where I didn't have this feeling of anxiety underneath my skin. I had it all as, and we start to explore all the time when it was 3, 2, 1. Yes, it was there
mm,
all along.
mm,
And then people are even able to visit um, time periods before there was a self,
mm.
because they can tune into this time where I was in the womb or when I was 3 months old,
Yeah.
and they can actually like tune their awareness into this period in time, and open up the body to feeling what sensations comes up to me when I think about the first 3 months of my life,
Mm.
and they
The
can
3 months in the womb or outside the womb?
either or. Uh,
Yeah.
uh, we can do different periods of time and then scan and say what comes up when you tune into this period of times of in time, what arises in your system, and people can actually start visiting these sensations and start relating to them, and it would crystallize out as being a very very small child, like a newborn child,
Mm,
and when this vulnerability is being seen again and related to by the person, then it suddenly starts to crystallize in a way that I'm able to relate to it, so
mm,
I can do the work myself in that way,
mm.
and that is possible for I don't know how, because this is really a puzzle. How can you relate to something that is not owned? There's no owner. There's no self to own the experience.
Yeah.
How can I then re-own it? Yeah.
Yeah. One way of putting it, Stan Grof also, had done a lot of work, before birth, all his different phases. And that research shows that it is really possible to have experiences of your time in the womb, and I think the solution it's a spiritual solution that the higher self is has part of its awareness in the child, but
Mm,
the I consciousness is still just a seed. It has not been developed yet. But the higher self, as a spiritual being, I'm supervising what's going on in the womb, and I'm also the with the part of me that is incarnated in this little embryo and in this little being that is developing within the womb. So there is an experiencer, or there is some kind of a higher awareness that is present during birth and the early years as some kind of an overshadowing presence.
mm,
Um, and this is the higher self that we then move towards through the stages of pre-personal development and egoic development and transpersonal development, then in some way we can say we have the involution, we project ourselves into the material world, and then we rise up again and reconnect with ourselves as a transpersonal being. So my it's not something that I can prove, but it's an understanding that I have, that even though the consciousness embedded within the infant has not been, you could say, fully activated, because this is only something we can do when we are adults, develop the I consciousness and know that I have a body, but I'm not my body. I have emotions, but I'm not my emotions. No child can do that. And this is awakening up to oneself, as you put it, as a witness. So perhaps when we revisit these earlier stages, we draw on some kind of a memory that lies within the higher self. I'm not sure, but it's my best guess.
I love that you say you're not sure, and
Mm,
I'm on the same understanding as you, and
mm,
I also really honor the I'm not sure, and
mm,
I have the same in me. I spoke to a very experienced woman who was working with birth trauma for many years, and she told me she released so many birth traumas, and at one point she was thinking maybe it wasn't even this person's birth trauma that came up. Maybe it was an archetypal birth trauma, or like in the collective unconscious. There are
yes.
so many birth
Yeah.
traumas around there, and when there's no ego, then the actual before ego state consciousness can draw up on these collective birth traumas.
Yeah.
So she said, I was not even sure if it was people's own birth traumas or if I was working with the birth traumas of humanity.
Mm.
So
Wow, I think
who is
that's a
owning it?
very
Yeah,
important point. Yeah.
yeah.
And because sometimes I also have, we unravel or experience experiences that is not from this lifetime,
Mm,
and it could be sexual abuse, it can be committing murder, or I have had many experience coming up in my own personal work with war traumas, and I've never been in a war, but I
mm,
see myself as a little child, and there's war around me, and my parents are dead, and I feel the terror, I feel the loneliness and abandonment, and I cry and I release all this pain, and then the question afterwards emerged: what was that?
yeah,
Was that an earlier life, past life, or was this some kind of a healing of the collective unconscious?
yeah.
Um, and it's very difficult to really be quite sure what exactly the source is, but it came into my environment. I had the responsibility to let go of it and heal it. And so we could call it a service. For some, uh, yeah, from some point of view, um, yeah, I think that's probably a good way to see it, that not being too sure about what is going on, but just honor that it happened.
Yeah, some of it, yes. And sometimes also it is possible to. So I'm both and or,
Yes, yes,
and I
yes,
also I enjoy both views,
yeah.
because sometimes it's also possible, and I like to have this hope in the work also,
Mm,
and it's also my experience. It's sometimes possible for people if they were taken away just after birth, and they
mm,
have a depressed, collapsed, lonely child inside them who's very, very young. Sometimes it's possible to re-engage with these parts that
mm,
were exiled before there was a self. And sometimes I think when the suffering is too big and people are unable to relate to it, it's being pushed down to the collective unconsciousness. So sometimes we can also when we tune into these layers of duality, and
Mm.
then stuff like that can come up.
Mm.
I think when people are having classic PTSD,
Yeah.
they they are having nightmares that are really almost like movies of what was going on.
Mm.
And then this was fragmented and trying to be exiled from personality, and during the sleep it is just like going on again.
Yeah.
If people have complex PTSD, like there was really big suffering, and it was also entangled in insecure attachment, and it was repeated a lot, and the suffering was over many years, and there was no holding around the person, then it becomes blurry, and still the self-protective system is trying to exile it, and
Mm.
it's being pushed out further into the subconscious, and then it starts to connect with archetypical stuff,
Mm.
and then it comes up in dreams and in the psyche as more symbolic images, and then it also connects with collective suffering of different kinds, and,
Mm.
and also mental illnesses of different kinds.
Mm.
But then it's connecting deeper into the archetypical layers of collective suffering, really.
Yeah.
And,
Uh,
and
could you? It's just for my curiosity, and I hope also for the viewers. What are the most important traumas that has been defined? Are there any catalog, or are there any? The birth trauma is very well known. Are there other types of trauma? That is in the literature that is well known and normal to perhaps experience.
I mean, there's trauma because somebody did something to you.
Yeah.
So there's you were used as an object by somebody else,
Mm.
um, and then there's trauma uh, arising from being abandoned and being
Yeah.
not related to. So
Yes.
there's a big category of traumas of everything that happened, and there's a big category of traumas of everything that didn't happen that should have happened,
Yes, exactly.
and those two are there. Um, some of the traumas of what was done to people, like if there it was a perpetrator and something was done,
Mm.
then there's an episodic, like this and this and that happens. Maybe there are three big situations of being bullied or
Mm.
uh, anything you can think of, and then you have these episodic traumas with a
Mm.
lot of charge in them, and then you can engage with the trauma in that way.
Mm.
Other people had thousands of times when their mother was not mirroring their happiness or supporting their engagement in the world. It was
Mm.
just a passive phase or a critical phase. So there's 1,000 small situations
Mm.
where there was no adult engaging in the child, and
Mm.
that's a different, like
Yeah.
that's a different ball game.
And I actually think that type of trauma, when I look back also on my own life, but especially my clients, sometimes they have been very difficult to understand. The type of trauma that occurs when the parents simply didn't get their
Yes.
child. They are a different type. They're simply a different breed. And I recall now a person who was brought up in a military family, a very sensitive boy, and they simply didn't get got his sensitivity.
No.
There was, and it was not. They were not evil. They were not bad people in any way, but they were just not, they didn't have any understanding of the child's inner psychological environment and what that child needed to grow.
Yeah.
And this is something that occurs on a daily level, this lack of understanding.
Yeah.
But when we go back, there's not any episodes of violence or criticisms. There's just this lack of understanding,
Yes.
and that the worldview or the experience of the child was not included as important in the parent's life. And I think this type of, I would call it trauma, and you had a definition of what was not done. There was a lack of empathy, there was a lack of understanding, there was this lack is also very something that really impacts the child.
Yes. Some systems of trauma therapy would call that small t, like small t trauma, and the episodic, the big T traumas. But the small t traumas are not smaller; they're just many more episodes. But there's no archive of the episodes, because if you grew up with the implicit understanding that you were not important, and you were not being regarded as somebody, then there is no archive. Why would you archive anything about a person who was not important?
Yeah.
It's like there's no episodes. The person said,
No.
I don't. If you investigate into the memory of a person, then there's just empty shelves.
Yeah, that's a good image.
Yeah. Because why would you record anything about a person who wasn't important? He's being depersonalized.
Exactly.
So there was never a set of eyes that was interested and felt that this person was really an important human being. It was never met by this pair of eyes. So there's no memories.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a very important understanding. If we should go to how do we work with trauma, we have already touched upon it, but are there any, if you should, you had this in your own personal life, you had, you had a transition to a new understanding of how to work with subpersonalities. And you mentioned the book. I've never read the book, The Body Keeps the Score, but I know it is very often referred to. So if you should say something about how you work with trauma, what are your core understanding of how to approach it?
Something is needed to work with trauma, and that's what we call dual awareness. And it means that you are able to have one foot in the here and now, and the other foot in the back then and there.
Yeah.
So the trauma has to be engaged emotionally, and you have to feel some of the trauma and open up to being in contact with it. And also you have to be rooted in yourself in a way that you can relate to what is coming up. And so this is the challenge every modality of trauma work is trying to solve. How can I support dual awareness while the awareness is coming closer and closer to something that used to overwhelm it?
Exactly.
Yes.
I would just, for the viewers that follow me and, that are often very acquainted with psychosynthesis, this is what we call, to work from the observer, work from the conscious eye. And the work is pretty much about to stabilizing our ability to be a loving observer to what emerges in the present here and now. And this developing of this loving observer creates an inner space where we can be with whatever emerges, and especially if we have the help from from a good therapist or person who is able to also stay present. So, and it seems to be very similar because it creates this dual awareness. You have one foot in your here and now, where you are relating to all the information that starts coming into the field of consciousness, and still you have another part of your awareness into all these new layers of suffering.
Yes.
Is that the same understanding you have?
Yes.
Good.
And so there are two ways of facilitating this I could think of. The one is continuously to engage the observer and strengthen the person in grounding and centering and clarity and relating to what is coming up. So we are having a ping pong between I don't call it the observer, because then it's something out there. So I call it you. So I address it like you, the self, you as a person. You are relating back and forth with the part that's carrying the trauma, but it is the observer. There's somebody here who's
Yeah.
Yeah,
because I say you, the observer.
Yeah, that's the same. It's the same. But and this is one of the things we can together in our dialogue create this dialogue and strengthen the you who are relating to what is coming up. And so this is one part of the work. Another part of the work is when the trauma, the overwhelmed part, used to overwhelm and put aside the observer totally.
Yeah.
So it contains too much, too fast, too unbearable. Then the observer is killed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we don't want that to happen.
No.
And so we can try to have like a taxation of the suffering. We can, in a way, like having a small peek hole into what happened, instead of having it all coming at once, like in small packages, one bite at a time. And that is the way to digest something that is too big.
Exactly.
My son used to be interested in Guinness Records book, and I remember reading this with him, where he was reading, there was a man and he ate a small airplane. And how did he do that? He grinded it and took a little spoon every day, and after I don't know how many years, he ate the whole plane.
It's insane.
It's a funny story, but
Yeah, very funny.
it's like the way we can digest a traumatic experience is one little package at the time. So we take it in small portions. And many different therapeutic modalities try to do this in different ways. One of them is called eye movement desensibilization reprocessing. Like engaging the traumatic memory, helping the person sit with the activation in the body, and then you're moving your fingers in front of the eyes, and the person is following your fingers with the eyes, like this. And this is like distracting a bit. It takes away your awareness a bit. It's like taxating your awareness, but that's really smart, because then you are actually able to be with something for an hour that you are otherwise only allowed to be with for 3 seconds. So if you can look, feel, relate to all the impressions and all the stuff going on for an hour, a bit of the time, then suddenly fragments of sensations and feelings and meaning makings and body sensations are being put together, and suddenly it becomes like a picture or like a movie with a beginning and an end, and suddenly it's all being put together, and then the person experientially have the feeling of now it's getting behind me.
Mm.
They will like have this, okay, now it's gone. And sometimes they will say, what happened to it? And it's funny now. It feels like it's back there somewhere.
Mm.
And so it has suddenly been put into order in time and space, and
Mm.
now it's in explicit memory. Now it's back there as something that once happened, and now I'm
Would you call it then that it's integrated? That's a big word in psychosynthesis. We integrate the exiles into a new functioning personality.
yes.
Would you call it integrated when you have went through it and it's in the back?
Yes, I think integrated is a very precise word. Also, neurologically and in any way, in every sense, integrated would be a good word for that.
Mm. Yeah, and one of the techniques that I have used a lot in my own life, but also on client, is creative um, painting or just drawing the sensations out. And I have discovered that many times I'm not able to put the right word. It's like the mental has not the ability to access
Mm.
the pain. But if I stop my mind and just take out different colors of crayons and start drawing on a white paper, and then I turn, you can say, an unconscious subject and turning it into an object. And then I can start engaging with the colors.
Yeah.
What is the black? The black is there's something hate here, or there's something related to death, and then it's my own interpretation. There's no rule as to what a color is meant to be. It's very individual, but it helps me to, in some way, the drawing becomes a container for the energy,
Yeah.
and so it's some kind of a intermediary before my mind is able to understand what is actually going on inside of me.
Yes.
Uh, how does that sound?
Sounds great. And also my experience, I see this as an alchemic process.
Mm.
Uh, it's like when you're in the soup, you're in prima materia. All the stuff is in you, and you are inside it, and you're not able to. It's not being crystallized,
Mm.
so you're not able to have a dialogue with it. You're just embedded in it. It's like a soup. You're swimming in this experience, and unable to relate to what is going on. And if you see it as an alchemic vessel,
Yeah.
at some point a coagulation is happening. It means that sometimes things are being put into shape, and it's like it's taking a shape or a form or a color,
Yes.
and
Yes.
then now I can start having a dialogue with it,
Yeah.
and slowly clarity is coming. So suddenly there's clarity, and there are starting to be objects
Mm.
in the water that I'm swimming in. So
Mm.
it's becoming more and more clear, and the self, the observer, is starting to shine through this.
Mm.
And then at one point it blackens the nigreto, or the dark, the process of it. Then the suffering is starting to come out of it,
Mm.
and that's where the process is continuing.
Mm. Okay. Yes.
And we can do that in many ways, and drawing would be one of them. It because it makes it possible suddenly to have clarity. There's now me relating to what is flowing out of this dark color that I put.
Yeah.
Okay, now I can start to have a dialogue with it.
Mm. Wow, this is really fascinating. I would like to ask you now that
Mm,
I have an expert that is
mhm.
has done a lot of investigating into traumas. There's also in the culture today there's a lot of conversation about trauma,
Mhm.
And sometimes I get the impression that, especially the younger generation, that there is some kind of a tendencies to blame all their misery and pain on, past trauma, or, something is, the causes of their suffering is all coming from external sources. It's my parents' fault. It's my society's fault. And I think sometimes there's a lack of understanding that pain is a natural part of the human life. I don't think we can ever avoid pain, but we can be better at mastering pain and work through it and use it as motivation to improve and getting better at being who we are. But how is your perspective on the cultural aspect of I would almost call it sometimes, but it seems to be some kind of a victim culture that you get an identity from.
Yes, I think that is a very damaging part of this trauma awareness that we're having. Now there's this wave of interest in trauma, and a negative aspect of that wave, I think, is what you're pointing to.
Yeah.
It comes with a joke from a Zen monk I listened to once. He said, many people are, it's like we're walking on a volcanic like rock, and it's very hurtful in our feet, and some people are trying to put rubber all over the volcano rock, and other people are putting on shoes, and it's
Yeah.
and then the other day there was this meme. I like memes that are coming up in the social media because
Mm,
they're trying to condense something that is going on in culture. And it said, everyone you dislike is not a narcissist. Every unpleasant experience is not trauma. Having needs that does not mean that you're codependent.
mm,
Disagreement is not gaslighting. Conflict is not abuse.
mm,
Taking offense is not being triggered. So
mm.
so we should, like, I like this because
Yeah,
it's
wow, it's really good.
we cannot prevent life or other people from triggering us. Our
Mm.
triggers is our work. This is
Yeah.
what we are working with.
Mm. Yeah, and I think it's so important to embrace the reality that in order to evolve, we have to expand our boundaries. And whenever we try to expand our boundaries, pain will occur. It's just like a normal feature of how nature works. That if we want to be good at something, very often it hurts. We have to concentrate. We have to discipline ourselves. We have to engage in uncomfortable situations. And it's also a lot of, when I work with my clients in psychosynthesis, we have a strong also emphasis on the will. And the will is about, it's not enough to have insights in psychotherapy. We have to embody the insights in action, in new types of actions, where we in some way communicate to the unconscious that I'm healed. So now I bring the new me that I discovered in therapy out into my relations and start being the new version of myself in my job, with my family, with my children, in all kinds of situations. And this is, we have to confront these barriers of fear of being rejected, fear of causing trouble, and it develops the courage, the courage to be who we are. Uh, how do you relate to that perspective?
Yeah, I like it. It's like grounding. That's
Mm.
it. Yeah,
Yeah, that's actually grounding.
yeah.
Mm. Okay, we had some kind of an agreement that you could do an exercise on
Yeah.
me and show how you work, and I would be your willing participant. So what have you in
Your
mind?
courage and
Mm,
also the vulnerability that is in this shift. Now we can be in our conversation out here,
mm,
dialoguing, ping ponging between us, and then there's a change of awareness that
mm,
might be possible now that you open up and explore something that you would be curious about or something
mm,
that's really I like that. It's a shift, and it's also a way to see for the people who are watching this. Okay, what does it mean? It's
yeah, exactly.
oh, I'm ready for this, and it that I would suggest that we just explore something, and
Yes.
and the guarantee I would give you in advance is if you can be curious and if I can support your curiosity, something will appear and
Mm,
something will show up, and
mm,
so this is what we can do together, like make some space for something that you're curious about or something that you would like to investigate, and I would do my best to support your curiosity and
mm.
exploration of whatever you might be interested.
I have always a lot of interesting stuff in my belly.
Mhm.
There's always a pain I can investigate. So
Yes,
let's see what's in there, and I will just follow your guidance, and we will see what emerges.
I like that. And so it often needs a shift of pace and a
Mm,
shift of awareness. So oftentimes there's stuff going on in the belly somewhere. Often there's a pain in there, and how can you start uh, guiding your attention into the belly? What? So my invitation is for you just to do it the easiest way you can,
mm,
maybe with closed eyes or
mm.
defocus and let your attention make space in your belly for whatever comes. It's like feeling, sensing, looking, listening into the belly, just creating a space or of awareness and presence there. And maybe parts of you that were engaged in the conversation or thinking parts and other parts might come in and comment or something, or see if you can, the best way you can, just be open, curious in the belly, see what shows up there.
I feel some kind of a tension, and it almost feels like an irritation in the left side of my belly, some kind of a frustration.
Okay, okay. And is is it okay for you to feel into it and
Mm,
relate? Okay. See if you can, not as a linguistic question, but more like you can ask with your awareness, what would you like me to know? What would you like me to know about you? If you could ask this irritable tension, that just really give it some space to communicate something to you.
I hear sentence, something like, I cannot express myself.
Ah,
It's like being in a prison or
ah.
limited.
And when you start to feel into this part or in this sentence, how do you feel towards it? When you hear it saying that, how does it affect you? Well, yeah.
I feel a curiosity, but also almost like I feel like I'm a father,
Hmm.
that I'm a father, and I want to learn why he is so. Yeah, I say he because now it starts to appear like it's me, a
Hmm.
6-year-old or something like that, part of me that is frustrated and irritable.
Yeah, yeah. And just see if you can let him have this fatherly energy from you. See if you can bring that fatherly interest and curiosity to him, so you can connect with him in that way.
He's not allowed to be angry.
Ah, does that make sense to you to know what he's pointing at? Yeah.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense
Okay.
because there would be hard consequences if I express my anger. So he's carrying this. It's like it's some kind of burning coal. So it's something very hot inside of him, and he cannot. He don't know how to let go of it.
Ah, okay. See if you can just let him feel that you resonate with him, that it makes sense. That you see and feel this hot, cold. He's burned in with this anger. And I also heard that you said that it would be dangerous. So probably he's remembering situations where it was really dangerous. Is that
Mhm.
right? Yeah. And how does he respond to you listening to this now? How does it?
His he don't really trust me yet. It's like he's not sure that I can accept that it's actually like he realizes that I'm observing him
Mhm.
and I'm present, but he's reluctant to reveal why he's angry.
Okay. Do you get that? I mean, do you think it's fair enough that he's like a little reluctant? He's like hesitating a bit to sharing it. Are you really interested? That's how he's looking at you. Could you understand that he would feel that way? Okay.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
and it's I get the sense that you from me. I'm adult. I'm not afraid of this. Little this
Wow.
little anger. But the boy for the boy, it's big issue because it takes up a lot of his awareness.
Yes.
He's afraid of exploding.
Yeah. And it kind of resonates when you speak for this. He's afraid of he's exploding. It's like a wave of emotion is there under your skin. Is I
Yeah.
get the feeling that he's also letting you feel that I'm afraid that I'm exploding. There's heat in there.
I almost feel like he wants to punch something
Oh, yeah.
or bring out his anger. That's something he's very frustrated about, and
Hmm.
I don't know exactly what it is.
Okay. Would it be okay for you be- if he showed you the situations where it was dangerous to express his anger? I heard you saying that you were aware that there were situations where it was dangerous. It would make sense that he's really hesitant of showing it. And so I would suggest, if it's okay only, that he would show you what happened. The most
Mm.
distressing the most distressing top 3 situations where it was most distressful to show his anger.
It's related to some episode with my parents where I was told I just have to shut up or
Okay.
face the consequences, and he had to eat his anger
Oh,
and the humiliation that he was not allowed to speak.
okay. And I think it's natural if you don't want to share every aspect of the story here, but and that's very good here because you can let him show you every aspect of the story
Mm.
inside. So you wouldn't have to share anything or everything about it out here in the open. But if it would be okay for you, just that he would share it with you on the inside, uh, this situation he was forced to eat his anger, and he was being humiliated, and it feels like there are really strong emotions in
Mm.
there. Yeah. Would it be
Uh,
okay? Yeah.
yeah, what I can share is that I inform him that I'm here to listen to it, and I'm not afraid of his anger, and
Mhm.
I would really appreciate him if he could share his anger with me because I know a lot about
Mm.
having built up anger within,
Yes.
and I sympathize with his anger. I think it's
Yes. Really let the anger hear this, that you're sympathizing with it. Really let him know that. That's important, I think.
he's now he informs me that he's afraid that he will kill his parents.
Okay.
Mm. But of course, this is the child's perspective, you know,
Mhm.
and I tell him that his anger is not dangerous.
Mhm. Yeah. There's something really painful here in this situation because when you're a child, 6 years old, or was it somehow the age he's having?
Yeah.
Yeah. When you're at that age and you're being humiliated by the parents, and there's no voice of standing up towards the humiliation,
Mm.
and you don't have the authority or the clarity to speak for yourself, then you're just forced to choke the anger,
Mhm.
and then it becomes really, really hot and really, really strong. Yeah. So he's trapped with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I get an impulse to share with him that I'm a man and
Mhm. Mhm.
he's a boy,
Okay.
and anger is part of being a man, of course, also for girls. But now I relate to him as my boy,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and
Yeah, yeah.
I think I can take your anger, and I like your anger. I
Yeah.
like to hear it.
And in that dialogue with him, I think it's really great that you let him feel your man body, so he can have your container. You can almost lend him that that man body that you have, so he can feel the bigger container from the anger, and also your voice and your clarity. So you have something to offer him there.
I feel that he start listens to me now, and I get some kind of information that he really longs for male company,
Mhm,
the father figure that would listen to him and help him deal with these types of emotion.
mhm. I think maybe it would be my suggestion to you to suggest to him that with this male company, with your male uh, fatherly, having his back attitude, that you could help him confront mother and father in this situation the way he couldn't back then. That I would love to suggest to you to suggest to him that you go with him into this situation where he was humiliated, and you lend him your voice and your authority to stand
Mm.
up for himself. Yeah.
But he tells me, he's not able to do that now. He wants to build confidence in me.
Okay.
He wants us to. I have to prove to him that I'm a reliable grown up and I can take his anger.
Okay.
So,
Does that?
and I think, yeah, and that resonate. And I think it would be a good way to. I feel that I have some kind of a plateau
Mhm.
experience now. I've established a relation to him, and he's
Mm.
curious about me.
Mm.
And I know this will take some time before me as the adult one and him as the child, that he builds that confidence in my ability to
Okay.
contain his anger. And so I think actually we could conclude or end the session here with me promising that
Mhm.
I will return to him, and together we can take the next steps when he's ready.
Yes, it sounds fair enough and attuned when you're speaking for it, both in you and in him. How does it like that suggestion you give him?
I see. I got an image that we were sitting together on a bench out in nature,
Mhm.
and I like that image. It's some kind of you know, being a father and taking the child out into nature is a good way to exercise
Yeah.
your power and your aggression.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I thank him and start returning here again.
Mhm.
Wow, that was good.
Yeah, it was good to feel the male connection you made and the fatherly love and yeah.
I know this was, I would have um, done it too fast. I have to connect with my brain again,
Mhm,
being
mhm.
down into the belly.
Yes,
So,
yes.
so, but I feel that this was a really good, this was a really good plateau where I can reconnect with him and
Wonderful.
do the next work.
Yes, good luck and
Yeah,
yeah,
thank you.
yeah, thank you.
Well, this has been an amazing conversation with you, Niklas. I think we really covered a lot. Is there anything you have on your mind or in your heart that we haven't really addressed? Um, yes, you have a new book out, and I will make a link in the description so the Scandinavian people out there can find a link where they can buy it. What's the title of the? Do you have a cover that you can show us?
I wanted to show the cover. I had a reception a few days ago, and every book was sold out. So
Okay.
that is, there is no cover to show because we are.
No. But we will clip in when in the editing we can show the cover. So
Yeah.
and this
In English, the title would be Time Capsules and Distress Signals.
yes,
In Danish, it's Tidslommer og nødsignaler.
yes,
So that is the title, and it's referring to this, that the exiled parts are sending out a distress signals they actually want to be related to,
mm,
but when they are getting nearer and nearer to the awareness, the self-protective systems is trying to blur the distress signal, and that's
mm,
the challenge we're working with all the time. So
exactly.
that's the
Yeah.
meaning of the title. Yeah.
And it covers some of the things we have spoken about today. So if people want to really dive into the deeper layers of working with trauma, this is the book for them.
Yes.
Mm.
Great. Was
And
a
where
pleasure.
can they
Yeah.
where can they connect with you if they do you do online sessions?
I do sessions, but I do not take in new clients for the time being.
Mm,
My mission and work now is teaching,
yeah.
continued teachings for psychotherapists in trauma therapy.
Yes.
So in English, it's called the School of Healing Arts. In Danish, it's called Skolen for Helingskunst.
Yes.
.dk.
Good. And I will
So, yeah.
put the link in the description too.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, it has been marvelous to be in your presence, and I think we will connect again in the future some way because we have much to share. So thank you very much. It has been really a pleasure to be in your company, and there was so much valuable stuff that we were able to share.
Yes, also for me, it was a rich conversation. Thank you, Kenneth, for
Okay,
for
bye
your time.
bye, and take care.
Yes.
Thank you for listening to Psychosynthesis Conversations. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and help us to spread the wisdom.